All right, we're here with author Christian Sheppard, who just wrote the new book, The Ancient Wisdom of Baseball: Lessons for Life from Homer's Odyssey to the World Series. And Christian, thank you so much for joining us. The title itself struck me before I got into the details about the book itself. Why did you want to bring Homer's Odyssey into the great game of baseball?
Well, it started from a very personal place. I was finishing my dissertation at the Divinity School at the University of Chicago. I have a PhD in religion and literature, and but our baby daughter was just born, and I had this strange experience where I'm walking out of the kind of like this building that looked like Hogwarts down on the campus. If you ever get to go to the University of Chicago, and you'll see you get to live the sort of the Oxford dream that's down there. And one of my fellow graduate students kind of came out of the shadows with a cigarette and said, "How are you going to raise her?" And, that's like kind of a strange thing to ask. You usually ask people like, how are you going to raise your child religiously? Do you pay your taxes? What's your favorite sexual position? These are like odd, rude questions to ask, but not at a place where like the devil's advocate is supposed to hang, where you're supposed to ask all of these religious questions and question metaphysical and moral things. And I had dedicated my life to studying these questions. And then when confronted, I was like, oh, I don't really have an answer. So I just quipped, and I'm going to raise her a Cubs fan. And then it occurred to me, what would it be like if all the questions that the philosophers and the theologians asked of religious and philosophical traditions, what would it be if you asked that of baseball, which I loved? And I was taking Cecilia to Wrigley Field and to these Cubs games. And I grew up a Red Sox fan, going to Fenway like all the time. And then I saw that the ethos that the ancient Greek philosophers espoused when they studied Homer, when they saw the hero Achilles and the hero Odysseus, I saw when I thought of my hero Carlton Fisk or my hero Jake Arrieta, like these heroes embodied virtues of courage and prudence and temperance. And the game itself was beautiful and sublime and tragic and comic and epic and all of these things. So I saw a way of taking this philosophical heroic point of view and updating it and bringing it into the contemporary world.
How did you go about putting this book together when you're dealing with these thoughts and concepts from ancient Greek and bringing them to the modern day and relating it to baseball? When you decided you want to put this book together, how did you ultimately want to structure it?
Yeah, it was a lot of work. That was one of the things that took time to really simplify it, because I thought there's a way in which this could really get away. Like I thought of this as a book of popular philosophy, as sort of my answer to Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. But anyone knows who has that book. It's a long book. It's an involving book. And I had this title, The Ancient Wisdom of Baseball, and I want people to see that title. Actually, you can see the book right here. I want them to see it glows in the light. I wanted them to see that title and say, the ancient wisdom of baseball. How do these two things relate? And what I wanted them to come away with is like, oh, I see. They both relate to me and to my life and how I should live and how I should pursue happiness. So then I crafted this book that's in 9 innings, rather chapters. It's 9 innings, and each inning is broken up into one of these ancient concepts, whether it was from myth to virtue. And then I have one extra inning. And the extra inning is what, as Aristotle says, you can do everything and live your life well, but if you're not lucky, you're not going to be happy. You need Fortuna to smile upon you to be happy. And for me, that last chapter is the telling of the Cubs winning the World Series. The happiness chapter, the penultimate chapter, chapter 9, is the Red Sox winning the World Series and breaking the curse, and Dave Roberts' now iconic steal. But the last chapter is the Cubs winning the World Series. So it's 9 chapters, like the length of a game. It's a fairly short book. I did the audiobook. It's a 5-hour audiobook. So basically the time it takes to watch a game with a rain delay and an extra inning is what you could do. So if the day that the Sox aren't playing, you can definitely read this book or listen to this book. And it's $27.95 because 27 is Carlton Fisk, my favorite player's number.
There you go.
So I crafted it into a base. So I wanted this to be like where Thoreau went to Walden, I went to Wrigley and Fenway. I wanted this to be a game into itself, but with philosophical overtones.
Why do you think baseball is such a philosophical game? Like, what is it about this sport that made you think you could turn it into something where you're comparing it to these other types of ideas? And I think a lot of people that love baseball, myself included, you get so deep in thought about the game because it's both simple and complex at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. I think baseball is kind of strange that way. I mean, you don't get this kind of, you don't get the waxing lyrical or the waxing philosophical when you follow football. Because I follow football a lot, I follow hockey a lot, I follow that. But baseball, the usual answer is that the game takes so long. There's time between innings. There's time for conversation. So philosophy is something that's predicated upon, hey, Socrates, what do you think about that? The decision that Francona made, that's the type of thing. That's one answer. I do think, though, that baseball is also such a strange creation, where you have these 9 players and there's pitching and there's all these rules. It attracts the interests of legal minds. A lot of lawyers love baseball. But I was of the idea that so some say that Abner Doubleday invented the game of baseball. But my notion is that Thomas Jefferson actually invented the game of baseball when he inserted not life, liberty, and the pursuit of not life, liberty, and property in the Declaration of Independence. He said life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I think there's a way in which this game is so American. It's almost like an institution that organically grew here to help us pursue happiness better. Because it's this odd confection where you can identify with the individual at the plate or on the mound, and yet you're in this context of a group that is a team playing with another group, and these two groups are cooperating in order to compete. And in that competition, in sort of like that, the forge of competition, our characters are forged, and we get to see these moments of excellence. That is why you go to the game.
I think it's interesting that you and your daughter were fans of teams that at one point were, as some would say, Greek tragedies. I mean, the Red Sox, they go 86 years without winning a World Series. The Cubs even longer than that before they win in 2016. What meaning did you gain, and what meaning did your daughter gain when both of your teams broke their respective curses and finally won a championship?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, this is like kids nowadays, they don't understand. To be a Red Sox fan was to suffer. They just don't suffer, the way that we suffered. But there's a truth in that. I mean, Boston fans now, they just don't even know what it meant to go through that, to think about the curse of the Bambino. And I read about that in the book Growing Up in Boston. I grew up in Brighton, and how much the Red Sox meant to us. My daughter, she's only and this is great. I'm happy for her, because she's only known happiness in many ways. But I think she bore witness to the intensity of my euphoria when these two teams won. So when the Red Sox won, I was really following them, and I was watching like everything when that, happy band of idiots did it. But I had this strange experience that I like jumped up, they won, and I sat back and I heard a voice in my own head say, I wish it were the Cubs. And it was at that moment that I knew I was actually a Cubs fan, that I loved Boston, I loved the Red Sox, but I had been living in Chicago for 20 years at that point and going to the Wrigley Field. And then, but when the Cubs won, it was, and I think everyone will feel this, the last chapter was actually, as a writer, was a challenge to compose, because there's no suspense, right? We know that they won, and so how do you start a baseball chapter with Cubs win? And really, what that kind of like brought home to me was when they did win, the battle was believing it. It was like you walked around kind of like, I think I'm not woken up from this dream yet. It's very, very strange. And so when 5 million people converged into the center of the city of Chicago to have this parade, everyone's looking around at each other. It's like, are you believing this? It's almost like we needed to come together to try to convince ourselves. It was like the opposite of grief. It was kind of this unbelievable, literally unbelievable euphoria in which reality was not, was greater than what we could comprehend. So I think part of what I try to get at in this book is the emotions of the fan. I definitely take the philosophical fan's point of view.
When you think of the Greek word virtue, what baseball player stands out the most to you?
That's a great question. Um, for me, and I think this goes to the notion of this idea of the favorite player, the great player. I mean, Ted Williams is the one who I think is the greatest hitter of all time, right? He was my dad's favorite player, and I have a whole chapter on Ted Williams and comparing him to Achilles. For me personally, when I came to Chicago, I had a cousin who was living here who had season tickets in the bleachers in right field at Wrigley Field, and that was right behind our Andre the Hawk Dawson, Hall of Fame player, had been with the Astros before. And one of the first plays I ever saw him make was just throwing a guy out from right field. And I have this line in the book as like the revelation of a human being grabbing a ball and just throwing it. That's what a human was like meant to do. That is the fruition of all human potentiality right there. So it's like, do everything in your life the way Andre Dawson throws a baseball. So I would, but there have been others, like, if you ever got to see Bo Jackson play, you just rub your eyes. If you ever see, I remember making the pilgrimage to Seattle to see Ichiro play. Right now, we are in the age of Shohei Ohtani, and children are going to tell their children and grandchildren that they got to see Shohei play. It's almost like the uniform was made for him to wear it. So that's kind of exciting. But I think everyone chooses their own player, and it's kind of like one of the joys is that you find the player that you like and that you find ways to admire because you relate to them.
And this is a book, again, the title, The Ancient Wisdom of Baseball, Lessons for Life from Homer's Odyssey to the World Series. It's a book that's been endorsed by Theo Epstein. And, I think Theo is one of those guys that we've gotten to know, obviously, over the years. And he champions the game and knows how important it is to the people that follow it. And, of course, just the nation and the greater world itself. There's so much to learn from baseball, but what life lessons do you think come out of the game that you tried to pass down to your daughter and are things that can be something that parents can pass down to kids?
Yeah. One of the points I tried to make in the book is that for me, baseball is my passion. And it's what when I look at baseball, I see these virtues. So like courage was thought of as the primary virtue. And it's by Aristotle, he says that you have to be courageous. You have any other virtues, if you're smart, if you know what you need to do, but if you don't have the courage to do it, it doesn't even matter at all. If you're well-tempered, you can control yourself, but if you don't have the courage to act upon that self-control, it doesn't matter. So courage is the number one virtue. And I think about someone saying like, don't be afraid of the ball, because it's scary to have a 90, especially if Chapman's throwing, you have a 100-mile-an-hour fastball heading toward your head. That's scary. But then I realized when people say don't be afraid of the ball, they're doing that to distract kids from what they're really afraid of, which is what Babe Ruth said. Don't be afraid to strike out. Baseball is a game of failure, and especially failing in front of our peers and failing in front of your friends and failing in front of your family. These are all things that you like justifiably fear. And so the lesson of courage that you can take from every at bat, I think that you can apply that to all aspects of your life. And I know my daughter, she's a fan of the game. I mean, but she's more of like a fan of mine. And so it's like one thing, like daughter at this point, she's in her early 20s now, and we'll go to the game together, whatever. But her passion is fashion. Like she's actually in the fashion industry, and she exhibits her own courage and she exhibits her own prudence. And that's the thing, is like you have to find the thing that's your passion and then apply these concepts to it. So that's why I was saying I've been really pleased. It was wonderful to get Theo Epstein's endorsement. I mean, he is like truly my philosopher king and my hero, and I owe to him some of the happiest moments in my life. So I'm really glad about that a baseball, that someone who's a baseball opinion, I cherish so much. But I'm also happy to see that in some of the early reviews of the book, because the book just dropped. It's people who say, I don't even like baseball, but I like this. I like this book a lot. I've tried to write it in a way that people could relate to it and say, oh yeah, that reminds me of, this thing that I love.
And again, the title one more time, The Ancient Wisdom of Baseball, Lessons for Life from Homer's Odyssey to the World Series. Christian, thank you so much for taking the time to chat. I know you're in Boston for the weekend, and hopefully get to see some Red Sox wins over the White Sox, but thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks.